What's up, guys? I've finally hit a milestone in my Kydex making career slash hobby, whatever you want to call it. Recently, well, not really recently, but in the past, I've basically kept to making knife sheaths as well as some random odds and ends. But today, I made my first handgun holster. Bam! Not a real handgun, as you can see here from this little twist knob here. It's actually an airsoft gun. Since I live in New York, specifically on on Long Island, at least in my county, it's not unreasonable to get a pistol permit, but that's only for going to the range and target shooting. It's actually quite difficult to get a concealed carry permit, and obviously you can't legally carry open unless you're a police officer or whatever. So for me, it's just down to airsoft guns, or in this case, air guns. This isn't exactly an airsoft gun. It's I believe it's a Daisy 15 XT in their Powerline series. It's supposed to be very similar to 1911. And yeah, I was kind of bored today, and I figured, and I pulled this out of storage. I bought this. When did I buy this? Maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when I was still at Stony Brook in college. And Walmart sold these, and well, Walmart still sells these. And we got them for some plinking, for some target shooting. I really, honestly haven't shot this gun in like 2 years. When I first moved out to Long Island, and for work and everything, I played around with this. I bought one of those like targets, and I was outside in my backyard and I was shooting around and everything. But I also ended up getting an air rifle as well, just for like target practice for plinking, not for like small game hunting or anything. The only thing with these is, compared to a real gun, they're not that accurate, and these are actually pretty inexpensive air guns, so they're not that accurate to begin with. I know you can get some pretty high-end air rifles that can shoot very well, like they're made for accuracy. This isn't one of them. But I was going through my stuff, doing some cleaning. I actually found this, and after getting tired of cleaning, I was like, you know what? Let's try and make a holster. I've always said that Kydex makers charge a premium for holsters, more so than like Kydex folders making sheaths for knives. And after making this, I can definitely understand why. It's more work, I suppose you could say. It's not more difficult, but it is more work to actually make a holster for a gun. As you can see here in terms of the fit, it's pretty nice. The retention isn't quite exactly how I like it. It doesn't really snap in with authority, but it's more friction on the two halves of the sheath. This is actually a pancake style holster instead of a taco fold over like I've been making for my knife sheaths. It still does snap in. There is like a good amount of retention here at the trigger guard. You can listen to it like this. But it is still held on by friction here, and I think the reason why is when I first molded this, obviously I molded it flat, but when I made these hip flares, it bent the top portion of the Kydex sheath more. You can actually see I also lost some definition here along where the slide would be, and that was from heating up this section to actually bend this for the hip curve. And what happened with that is when I did this top piece, I guess, just formed closer up against the air gun, and now it is kind of held in by friction. You can kind of see when I insert it, the two halves actually split open very, very slightly. It's not terrible. If you keep it clean, it's not gonna really scratch it up. And in all honesty, even with a real gun, a real handgun in a Kydex holster, it's very difficult to get good retention without eventually seeing some wear along your slide. That's just the price you pay for carrying a handgun in a Kydex holster. There's going to be wear in it, especially when it gets dirty. Kydex itself won't scratch metal because it's a relatively soft plastic, but when dirt and things get embedded into it, that's what ends up scratching your knives, your handguns, whatever you make a sheath for. So, I mean, in terms of the definition, I did pretty well in my opinion. I used 2 pieces of 0.06 inch thick Kydex, and you can see actually, the funny thing is actually because I've never heated up this amount of Kydex at once in the oven, I actually ended up melting part of it. But luckily, the portions that melted were over here, and they got cut off anyway. Because luckily, when I cut the pieces of Kydex out and I first made the mold, I made the mold extend over more so than exactly where I wanted. You can see I went ahead with one of those sweat guards on the sides, and I made 2 regular feed-through belt loops. The belt loops I used 0.08 inch Kydex for. I thought about using the thicker 0.125 inch Kydex, but I felt it was a little overkill because this isn't an actual handgun, it's just an air gun. So, in terms of retention, if I were to ever come across a handgun that I would carry concealed or whatever, if I were to make holsters for it, I would definitely use thicker Kydex just for the belt loops, just for more peace of mind. But for an air gun, it doesn't really matter. It's not as heavy as a real gun anyway, so it shouldn't be an issue. I didn't want to use the 0.06 inch Kydex for the belt loops because I felt that would have been a little too thin. And obviously, if I could have used the 0.093 inch stuff, that'd be more ideal. It would be like more of a balance between the 0.08 inch and the 0.125 inch, but I don't have any of that. So this works out pretty well. There's still a bit of flex to it, but it's not a huge deal. And it does retain really well on the belt. I did try putting this on my belt to see how well it would work. But honestly, like when I made this, the holster, it was just to see if I could do it, When I first started making Kydex sheaths, one of the things I did was I went on YouTube and I took a look at what videos were available, and I tried to get as much information from those videos as possible. And one YouTuber that I saw in particular was Philly EDC, or Philster, and he doesn't really make sheaths, but what he focuses on is handgun holsters. And he actually put up a good series of videos, and then eventually I think he made an updated version which turned out to be like 1.5 to 2 hours long, basically going from the step-by-step process of what he does to make one of the holsters that he sells. Obviously when he first started making those videos, he wasn't actually selling his holsters, but people saw that the quality of his work was so good that they started asking him about how much he would charge to make them a holster, and now he's basically made a business out of it. So I learned a lot from his videos, even before I even thought about making, a handgun holster. Just because even though the shape of the object is different and everything, properties of Kydex are still the same. Generally, the presses are very similar. You might use a little thicker foam or a little thinner foam, depending on the thickness of the object you're trying to mold. Obviously, this is not anywhere near the quality of holsters that he makes. He's made hundreds, I'm sure, so he has some pretty professional quality. This is my very first one, and for a first holster, I'm pretty happy. If I were to make this holster for a real gun, would I carry it? Maybe. It's not terrible. I would want it to retain a little better, so in that respect, it's not the greatest. But in terms of the size, I think I could probably improve on it by trimming away more material. But in all honesty, if I were to carry a handgun concealed, I would carry in waistband. And honestly, in an in waistband holster, I would probably just end up using something similar to a skeleton holster that he makes instead of using this. Holsters like this, the way it's configured, it's generally for open carry because the only thing you're going to have over it is a shirt or maybe a jacket. And this prints like crazy because it's such a thick package that just with a shirt over it, you'll print. Maybe not so much with a jacket. So definitely, if you want to carry in waistband, then the style of holster is a little different, but the general idea of how to mold it is the same. I do wish that, I do a lot of things by hand. Like, I don't really measure out a lot of things, which translates to some inconsistencies in the final product I put out. But because I don't really sell these, and these are just for personal use and enjoyment, I don't really mind. I prefer form and function over aesthetics any day. And, you can kind of see, like, from these rivets, they're not... I tried to evenly space these rivets and these rivets, but they're not like exactly lined up. And you know, when I made these belt loops, you can see like I freehand sanded them down, so they're not super even. But for me, it's not a big deal. I do wish I could have finished the edges of this holster a little better. Because like one thing I've noticed is when you go for a draw, because of like this area here, it's not super sharp or anything, but it is somewhat rough. And normally like this top portion of your finger, that skin doesn't really build up a lot of calluses, so it does kind of wear away at you. But for what I intend to use this for, I don't think it'll be a big deal. It does look kind of ugly, but at the same time, it's a first attempt. You know, it's not, I didn't get crazy good definitions because in all honesty, my press setup isn't the greatest, and I probably didn't get the Kydex into the press quick enough to start molding, so that's why the definition suffered. But it's functional. I'm happy with it. If I were actually going to keep this setup, you know, at least when I'm outside my backyard target shooting with it, it would be good. You know, I wouldn't have to stuff the air rifle, the air gun into like my pocket or put it on the ground or anything. I could basically reholster it. I do plan to send this out to someone. Hopefully they'll be able to use it more. Just because honestly I don't really feel the need to keep this because like I said before, I haven't shot this thing in so many years. It's just kind of building up dust. I'm not even sure if the gaskets for the air canisters are still good because I haven't put anything in there in a while, and I haven't really maintained it with lubricants or anything. You know, you're supposed to use like silicone grease on gaskets to make sure they don't dry out. But the person I'm planning to send this to, I don't think they'll be using it to actually shoot with anyway, so it's not really a big deal. And I was kind of bored today, so I figured I might as well just try it. And I think it worked out pretty well. It was a good learning experience in terms of making Kydex, just because it's such a drastic difference in all the other things that I've actually made Kydex for in the past. You know, it's much thicker, it's much bigger overall. And normally I don't go with pancake style sheets, I go with taco foldovers, so this was a different experience as well. In terms of the cutting out the form was actually kind of easier because I was only cutting through one thickness of Kydex, versus when I do foldovers, I'm cutting through two thicknesses. The difficult part was basically aligning everything back up. In order to get the two halves together, like I did a rough cut, you know, in the beginning of this video I'll have put up some pictures of what I did along the way. But I did a very rough cut along the edges, and then eventually what I did was, you know, cleaned out the rough cuts, put the airgun back in the holster, and I used pony clips on the sides to line up the two halves. I drilled it and riveted two rivets first, and then I went ahead with like finishing up the edges so that they were, you know, relatively even, and because the rivets are holding it, it's not going to shift on me. And then also the same applies to when I drilled the rest of the rivet holes. Because those two pieces were riveted, it wouldn't move around a lot, and I wouldn't have to keep this gun like in the holster while I was trying to work with it. And then, you know, obviously, you know, the rough cutting part, you know, for like this sweat guard, I did rough cut at first. And then afterwards, when everything was all riveted together, I went in with my Dremel with the sanding drum, and then, you know, did final touches, you know, kind of smooth everything out, grind away places that I didn't want, like this section here underneath the trigger guard. You know, obviously when it's actually in the holster and you want to go grab it, this was coming all the way up straight, so you can actually get a full grip on the handle to pull the gun out. So I went ahead and Dremeled that away, and I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. I don't know if I'll be making another one of these anytime soon, because honestly, this is the only air handgun that I have. You know, I can't make anything for the air rifle that I have. I don't plan on buying another air gun anytime soon because honestly, I don't need to use them. But at least it's kind of a stepping stone for the future. Like, say if I were to move to a more gun-friendly state or city where I would be able to get a concealed carry handgun, then, you know, at least I know that I can make something that's usable and not something that's complete trash. And it took around 4 hours to completely make, although granted maybe like 45 minutes was actually getting the molding right to begin with, to the point where I was happy with it. And then a lot of time was spent doing final sanding, evening everything out, getting everything relatively smooth. And, you know, looking for spots that would like rub up against skin. Like here, you know, I went in, this is like the final thing I did where I sanded this down even more, so like a hand could actually fit in there in that slot. So it took 4 hours. Not terrible, but you can definitely see why these holsters actually cost a lot from custom makers, because even though they have better tools than I do, and maybe they can finish holster in like an hour or two, but it still takes time and effort. And in terms of raw materials, you know, I have 8 rivets total, which doesn't cost much, 4 Chicago screws, and the bulk of the cost would probably be the Kydex material itself. I ended up taking 2 of my 12 by 12 inch squares and cutting out sections of it, like maybe a 12 by 3 to 4 inch section out of it, and the rest of those 2 pieces, you know, went for this. The others I'm gonna save for making a knife sheath, so it's not to waste. So figure I use like a sheet and a half of the 12 by 12 inch Kydex, which isn't a lot. You know, it translates to maybe, depending on where you get it, like how much you buy in bulk, it'll be in like around $12 to $15 total for the raw materials. Not terrible. It's really the time that really kills you. And honestly, I could have done it a lot quicker if I didn't have to do everything with like a corded drill and a Dremel and sandpaper on a flat surface. You know, obviously things would have gone a lot faster if I had like a belt sander and some sort of, you know, saw setup that would allow me to cut the Kydex a lot better than with the Dremel. But yeah, it was fun. It was enjoyable. I learned a lot from it. One thing I do want to mention in terms of my Kydex videos, for anyone that's still watching this video, is that my intentions of making these Kydex videos isn't to teach people how to make sheaths, how to make holsters. It's more of a journal of things that I'm learning along the way as I make these for myself. You know, I definitely don't encourage you to look at my videos and think of them as a tutorial, because they're not. I don't really go in depth into a lot of the process that I do. Really, the only time I ever showed the entire process of me making it, and it wasn't even the entire thing, it was just step-by-step instructions, were like the first 5 videos I've ever put out for Kydex sheath making. After that, it's been more of like a before and after type of thing, where the idea of making the sheath is still the same. I'm using the same press. I'm not doing anything special. All the tools I have now are the same as before, except in the very first video, I think I used a coping saw and now I use a Dremel. But everything else is the same. So I don't really feel the need to show all those steps over and over again. What I might do is, I think what I'll do for this holster is I'll take pictures along the way step by step instead of actually doing video for it, and I'll put those in the beginning, and then basically the video afterwards will just kind of explain why I did it and what I learned, you know, because every time I do a new project I learn something new, and it's something that I can share with you guys. And if you want a better tutorial on, you know, Kydex forming, I would definitely suggest you check out Philly EDC. I'll put a link to his channel in the description, and also check out Gavco. You know, he makes his own custom knives and he makes sheaths for them. He doesn't do it as a business or anything; it's his hobby. But he, you know, he was also one of the first, one of the first videos that I saw about making knife sheaths out of Kydex, and it's pretty useful. And honestly, like, they have much better step-by-step instructions in their videos than I do in mine. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys enjoyed me talking about the first gun holster I made. And thanks for watching.